Hey everybody, this is me, Bishop John Selders, and tonight, boy, we got a barn burner tonight. We got a barn burner tonight. Look, first of all, let me just welcome you once again to this space, to this place. We call it Relevant Conversations with yours truly, Bishop John Selders, aka I get to talk to some really very fine and interesting folk about all the kind of stuff I want to talk about. How about that? So that's what this show is. And tonight we have something that I think will be very special. For the last several weeks, as many of you who follow me and who check in on what we do, been curating conversations around the role of the prophet. Let me frame it up, starting with what I think is my work to do as a faith leader, is to talk about and to challenge, at least in my own mind, what it might mean to stand in the place of the prophet. Prophet Nathan to David. He was the prophet. So David was king. And when David was messing up and the prophet came in and said, "You're messing up," that's one role. There was Samuel, who was serving, and learning from the prophet Eli, and Samuel heard a voice, and he didn't know what to do with that voice until the prophet said, "Next time you hear that voice, say, 'Here am I.'" Right? So there are various different roles and different spots in different settings. Prophets show up, and for us in the contemporary context, we've had Prophet Martin and Prophet Malcolm, and we've had Prophet Fannie Lou, and we've had Prophet, or better yet, in the contemporary context, Prophetess. I don't like that term, Prophetess, but anyway, Prophet Ella Baker. We've had these moments where Fannie Lou and others, we've had these folk who show up and show us the way, and they say forth what we believe are the words of the divine. And so we've had one of those, I believe, prophets that has made transition. So we'll spend a little time talking about that prophet, but I want to do that in the context of two wonderful folk. One is my brother in the work. Indeed, we've been connected to the hip in all kinds of ways over these last 30 plus years or so. Amen. Praise the Lord. I ain't gonna tell your age, because telling your age, telling my age. Anyway, and come from some similar roots and similar spaces and places, and someone who I've witnessed from a distance, and over the last few years have come to know a little bit around the edges, and their work in I like one of the places I was looking on your bio, Black Appalachian. You hear about Appalachia, and you don't really know there's Black people in the Appalachian Mountains, and West Virginia, and Eastern Tennessee, and Kentucky, in them their hills. And so I appreciate very much your work on the edges, doing lots of different things, from reproductive justice to working in the queer community, and on the front lines, and now in your role as the co-director of the Highlander. Let me get it right. The Highlander Research. I done botched it up already. It's something about I'm gonna call it what we call it, the Highlander Center. And I'm gonna bring Sister Ashley Woodard Henderson to the people, and then my brother, who is the pastor of women. Now, let me get this right: Theology and Arts for Valley and Mountain Church of God in Christ. No, I'm gonna mess up. See, I'm messing up already. Valley and Mountain United Methodist Church. These are my two guests, my loved ones, my family. Come on, y'all. Come on and greet the peoples and everything. Greet the peoples and everything.
Uh,
Hello, good preachers. It's a pleasure to be the heretic amongst you.
now, now, don't you tell her to lie. She went over go over to Union and getting a degree in theology over there. So don't, and she hang out with that old Gina Stewart. So don't let
I
her.
love me some Gina Stewart. Shout out to the Christ Missionary Baptist Church family that might be watching tonight at Valley Mountain. We love you too.
Yeah,
Thanks for
yeah,
having us, Bishop.
yeah, yeah. Hey, Doc, how are you?
I'm doing okay. I'm doing okay. Listen. Can I frame this up a little bit? I've talked to both of you off camera. Now we on camera. Wanna talk a little bit about what I've been doing. I've been curating these conversations around the role of the prophet, but I wanna contextualize that a bit more. I'm getting ready to go to that old education, Reverend Sekou. Antonio Gramsci came up with a term he called conjunctural analysis. All right, this idea that we're in a moment, the conjuncture, right? And then some of my colleagues here at Trinity College, I call it Trinity, I'm using some of my African American English, my Ebonic, Trinity College, are having conversations around what does conjunction mean, and they're going far field. They're talking about it in terms of housing. They're talking about in a global context, talking about education, talking about it in terms of economics. And I thought, wouldn't it be interesting to use those lenses and frame it within the context of our religious lenses in some ways, and talk about this moment and this a conjunctural analysis that we can draw from. And of course, we couldn't do this today without also paying homage and tribute to the Reverend Dr. James Lawson, who just made transition a few days ago, who's now joined the balcony of heaven, looking now from over the balcony of heaven, as we might say, parenthetically, and to talk a bit about the role he played in his time, but also I believe as a mirror or maybe a model that we can kind of use, to buffer off of and argue with as it relates to what in the world we got to do in our time. So that's our task tonight. That's our task tonight. And, let me first say that Jim Lawson came out the great African Methodist Episcopal Zion tradition. He's a son of a preacher. And was born in Pennsylvania, near about 100 years ago. He was 95, getting ready to turn 96 years old. And then makes his move. Daddy get a church. So, when Daddy get a church, the whole family got to go. And so they move around and settles in that church, St. James African Methodist Episcopal Zion. I just like saying it like that. I just like saying, that AME Zion. And to note that the Zion Church, the AME Zion Church, it played a very critical part historically in our liberation, in the liberation of Black people throughout our history in the sojourn here in the United States of these United States of America. So we start there, and then his work. Ashley, of course, you inherited some of his legacy there at Highlander. So we can talk a little bit more about what that means for you. I just wanted to set that up, and that he's birthed in the African Methodist Episcopal Zion tradition, and then moves over and receives his call in the United Methodist tradition. So and served there faithfully the last half of his time on the earth until his retirement, and then plus. So I'm gonna shut up and let you go to talking. Talk to me a little bit. Talk to us a little bit about Dr. Lawson, and I call him Baba Lawson, and what his work and what it means to you now.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I would not and could not be who I am today without the leadership and legacy of folks like Reverend Lawson. both because of his connectivity to Black liberation theological background that I try to live in my own spiritual practice, but also because he made waves in the great state of Tennessee, which is where I'm born and raised. I'm an East Tennessee supremacist, as you mentioned in the bio. And so, you know, one of my best friends is a Vandy Divinity grad and my co-director at the Highlander Center, Alan Maxfield Still, who I adore and who I've been doing faith organizing with for a really long time. But also because I came up with Black Panthers and SNCC vets and Corps vets and folks that had led SCLC. And so one way or the other, me and Jim Lawson's long legacy, decades worth of work before I even made my way to this planet, was influencing what I would become before I even knew it. But really how I met Jim Lawson was through the National Council of Elders, which, I'm sure you and your guests know, was founded by him and his brother Phil and Vincent Harding and Dolores Huerta and Grace Lee Boggs and Vincent Harding, and has gone on to do incredible intergenerational work led by veterans of the 1960s and 70s social movements and economic movements and movements for environmental justice and the like, indigenous sovereignty, all sorts of stuff. And when I met him, honestly, we were fighting. We were fighting about the conjuncture, right? We were arguing about what young people did and did not value. You know, I think he had lots of questions as the movement for Black Lives rose in prominence about whether or not we were committed to nonviolence or not. And I was like, well, it's really challenging to hear that considering people like you, Reverend Lawson, trained up a bunch of people like us. So I think that there was a healthy intergenerational conversation being led by folks like Dr. Lawson with people that are millennial and younger, that really shows us a lot of ways that we should be learning about how to be in right relationship with one another. I think folks will talk about what it meant for him to be a pastor. I think folks will talk about what it meant for him to recruit Dr. King into more intentional responsibility to building social movements through his theological framework and through his commitment to nonviolence and learning about nonviolence and executing plans that were nonviolent. I think you'll hear about his relationship to the student movement, et cetera. But what you might not hear is more the 21st century interventions of Reverend Lawson, which I think are equally as important and as some of the things that he's going to be lauded for doing in the 60s and 70s.
Thank you, sis. Because one of the things, it's interesting. You said this, and it made me remember something that's significant. His coming to terms. He cited there were two concurrent meetings. He met Mahatma Gandhi.
That's right.
In his writings in 1940s, the late 1940s, 1947, 1948, and he also met A.J. Muste. Who that kind of merging of those two set the course for him. That then into the 1950s, where his work, once he got to Vanderbilt and there in Nashville, made history, quite frankly. And so it's very interesting that there's this concomitant streams that kind of met at a point, and just so happened that that's the same period of time that the book was written, Jesus and the Disinherited. That gets published, and so I think they were those who were in the theological Black world may have been wrestling in their time with what it means. And these are young people again. You know, Martin King comes to Birmingham. He was 26. You know, the youth knew it was the youths that was moving and acting. So, Reverend Sekou, talk a little bit about how you came to know Jim Lawson and your relationship to his work and, of course, yours.
Well, part of as Ashley situated it right, part of who I am was shaped by stuff before I knew him. You know what I mean? So Lawson has already been to jail for about 18 months for refusing to go to Korea. He's been to India, and so he's at Oberlin, the School of Theology, and Harvey Cox is the chaplain, the great Harvey Cox, the
Harvard.
Yeah, Harvard professor. And so Harvey Cox introduces him to King in 57. King say, you got to go south. So he transfers to Vanderbilt, gets in trouble for training students, expelled from Vanderbilt. And so Harvey Cox will be my professor. And I had the opportunity during Occupy for Harvey Cox, Charles Adams, and Jim Lawson to have a public conversation about this historic moment. Well, on Occupy, we served communion in Occupy in Boston, and we came in. So that was a great moment of my life. I met him in the middle. I met him in the early 2000s around the question of the war against the precious people of Iraq, and I was running the group called Clergy and Laity Concerned About Iraq, which was built upon the legacy of clergy and laymen concerned about Vietnam. And so some of those founders of that include, I got a chance to meet with as part of the great Walter Wink and daughter Susanna Heschel, the daughter of the great Abraham Joshua Heschel, and William Sloan Coffin, these kind of old lions in that movement. And so I would go to the SCLC conference as a representative of this group, and I would meet him. And so the first time I met him, I was like, look, we're about to run this action at the White House. I need help. And he looked at me and he says, what are you reading? I said, Albert Camus. He said, you're not serious. And he walked off. James Bevel would do the same thing to me. So you're not serious. So I kept nagging him. And so then Diane Nash made him be nice to me. She was like, James, Dr. Lawson. So she made him be nice to me. So I sat with him for about 3 hours, and I have these 3 moleskins. And he gave me everything he had. And so, and I keep them, when I'm getting ready to run an action. Then when Ferguson happened, we was about to run another action. And me and him got to tussle. Because he talked real slow. And it used to frustrate me. Him and Vincent Hardin. Oh, they talk so slow. Young man. I was like, Jesus Christ.
Yeah, I definitely used to get in trouble for finishing his sentences.
You're right. And so it's just like, so anyway, we were driving back from Boston to St. Louis, because you remember we was on that no-fly list. So we're driving back, and I'm on the phone with him. I was like, hey, man, I'm about to run this action. I just need to check in. And he was like, you need to tell the people who are throwing bottles and stuff and hand them over to the police. I was like, sir, I will never be able to go back outside. Like, ever. I just won't be able to go back outside. And I want to be able to go back outside. And, like, me and you have a different relationship to this day. And he kept telling me, yelling at me and all of it, right? And I was like, so look here, man. Either you're going to tell me what I need to know, or if it goes bad, I'm telling people you're my mentor. And he gave me what I needed.
You ain't right for doing that. But I see your strategy, though. I see
By any means necessary, met by all the means, Bishop.
I said, okay, if this is what we're doing, sir, what we're not going to do, I'm going to blame it on that. And so, and he preached for us on Valley Mountain in the pandemic. And yeah, so I do know he made some calls. Justin Jones got in trouble at Vanderbilt, and they was gonna take his scholarship. And Jim Lawson called and said, "I will take all my goddamn papers back if you don't get that boy his scholarship back for organizing." Right, the School of the Prophets is what they call it over there at Vanderbilt. And so that's who he is. That's who he was. So yeah, I think one of the things that is of interest to me about this moment, right, is those of us who are a little older, what does that mean for us? Because our generation is passing. Our teachers are mostly gone. And so what does that mean? Like me and Tuffy and Tafur Muhammad, we talking my cousin. We were talking about it. And she said, "Well, it's just us now. I mean, we the old ones around." I said, I don't want to be one, but what else they got?
Yeah, the Yelders are eldering right now. The Yelders are eldering.
Like,
That's a funny thing right there to think for a moment. What? I'm the elder, right? I'm the elder in the midst. I mean, let's name someone. We talking about Diane Nash. We talking about James Bevel. We talking about Bernard Lafayette. We talking about Marion Barry. We talking about John Lewis. Those were the young Turks coming through, right? During those 1960s, and of course, let's be honest to say they didn't get along. And then Jesse and them was coming along after that, and they was mad with him. I mean, so there was not always uniformity around strategy, right? It's interesting. Let's be for the historical record. FOR, the Fellowship of Reconciliation, was vital in the foundation of CORE and SNCC for that matter, right? So this kind of partnership between the youth organization, I find it just hilarious. The youth group of SCLC becomes SNCC in effect, right?
But I one of the things that is interesting to me is that I have a suspicion that the kind of hierarchical nature of organizing in that culture, and that fact that many of them had come out of party formation. So, a lot of them had been in socialist orgs and that kind of stuff, that they could hold a operational unity better.
That's right.
Like they would tussle, right? You know what I'm saying? But they could hold a public operational unity. So Kwame Ture would say it this way. He said, we'd be calling Dr. King the Lord behind his back. And then, but if I go in Mississippi and one of them, and I'm trying to register votes, and one of them old women say, "Are you Dr. King's man?" "Yes, ma'am, I am." Right.
Yeah.
They could hold a dialect. They could hold the dialect. Dialectical materialism related to the conjuncture at that moment, right? And I'm not taking it for granted that people might be like, "What the hell does the conjuncture? What does that mean?" And it's just a fancy word for like a time or a state of affairs where prompt or decisive action has to be taken. Like there's no other option. That's all conjuncture means. It's like it's a time of crisis, which is essentially what they were in and what we are currently in. And I think that's right. I think they could hold the sort of multiple truths that were true at the time. I think they understood how to be in struggle with one another and still have operational unity. I agree with you, Sekou. I also think they summed up their work. They were accountable to summing up their work in a way that I feel like we,
what you mean?
Many of us in process aren't really good at. I mean, like whether it's SNCC or CORE or any of them, any of the COFO organizations, there is a paper trail about like, we have a hypothesis that we think this intervention, this theory of change is going to get it done, whether that's MFDP, whether that's Freedom Summer, whether that's the Freedom Rides, etc. They execute a thing and they're like, on this day, we did this. This is what worked. This is what didn't. This is what we're going to do about it moving forward. And I feel like 21st century social movements, in the most contemporary of them, don't get held to that same standard of excellence in regards to both prior planning, right? Strategy. What's the difference between a strategy and a tactic? That everything actually shouldn't be rapid response. We should be building power, and we should be summing up our experiments so that we can say, like, we had a lot, we thought that this is what should happen based on this assessment of the conjuncture. We had a prophetic vision, whatever. I don't even care what it is, but we thought it was this. This is what we tried, and this is what we learned. Our differences, I think that's another thing that's different between us and them, is like they could actually articulate what their ideological differences were. You know what I mean? Like they debated the line. And I think folks like Jim, I was talking to Bishop about this earlier, is like, I feel like even when I disagreed with Lawson in all of our political and ideological struggles with one another, at the beginning, middle, and end of the day, I was always sharper for having struggled with him. And I think he knew, I think sometimes he did that just to make me have to debate a line. You know what I mean? I don't even know if he always believed the shit he said to me. You know what I mean? But like, I think he did it so that I would be better prepared when called the question by opposition or middle forces or whatever. I could articulate a line that was about Black liberation solidly. And I don't think people will give him enough credit for the ways that he really pushed some of us to be sharper in our analysis and in the delivery of our organizing work.
Thank you for saying that, Ashley. But Sekou and I talk about this often. The struggle that I have, understanding the role that I now have, here in Connecticut, we brought back Black Lives Matter to Connecticut with my old behind, Pamela and I, and we understood we were here for the season to get it started, to call it up, and then move out the way, but kept having to come back to it because the churn, all they wanted to do was be mad and get out there and yell and scream. And so we pull, and I'm down, let's get out there and, do whole public space. But then what's the strategy? What are we trying to do? What's the target? And for me, and certainly, in that moment, we're talking now almost a decade. Mike Brown got killed. It'll be 10 years, right? That's a decade. So back then, it needed to have a political end attached to it. For me, it was no good if we out there on the line, we got the moment, right? And we not moving it towards some change. What's the change we want to have? And you just, for example, defund the police, great line. Down with that. Let's figure out how we do it, and let's do it incrementally, and have some vision toward down the way a bit. We may not get this tomorrow, right? And one of the things that I'll assert in this moment, that seemingly folk who are not on the side that I'm on seem to have a vision for what 20 and 30 years looks like, as opposed to what it is that I feel like folk on our side, it's only rapid response, and we're responding to the thing that already done happened. We have the vision toward what's going on down the way. And so for me, I think one of the roles of the prophets of today is to say, what saith the Lord? I'm gonna use that term, understanding what you just said. About what Kwame Ture said about Dr. King and them. But what said God? What's the movement? What's the spirit of the time? What's the zeitgeist? Okay, you want to use that. What's the spirit of the time? And what might it be boding for us in down the way a little bit? And I struggle for what that actually looks like. And I'm wondering, you all respond and react to that.
You want to go first, Rev? Yeah. You want to go first?
No, you go ahead.
No, I can follow you.
Okay. I think the first thing, I think we have two competing zeitgeists. I think there's a zeitgeist der Angst and a zeitgeist der Freiheit, a spirit of age of angst and a spirit of age of freedom. I think the way in which the massive technology and the way in which the human species is freer in many ways than the other form of the human species, right? So you have this sense of freedom in terms of mobility and that kind of thing, particularly in the Western world. Then, there's also just the insecurity from like that the world may just burn up, right? That kind of ecological threat, combined with everything is falling apart. Like there is something to be said when there are bombings in Paris, right? Right. That kind of like in terms of what is happening in terms of I'm just talking about particularly in the West, which where we live. And so I think that's part of that's what we're wrestling with in terms of the spirit of the age. I think I wonder, maybe me and in honor of Jim Lawson, me and Ashley will tussle over this. I feel like a lot of orgs that their strategies are primarily a communication strategy.
I don't think that's a strategy. I think it's a tactic, but I think
I'm
that's
just
true.
saying. Yeah. Okay. 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 Okay.
I think
Dang it.
yeah, it's a generalization, but yes, I agree with you.
I think there's a primary and um and so because there's a sense of that because that is that we it I think the challenge that has always remained is that how do you do a base building movement? How do you create blocks of people who you can move? And I think that remains like and all the resources from the philanthropists even to the political parties are uninterested in that. They're interested in the horse trading of electoral politics. They're not interested in base building in that kind of way. So that's one. And then I think the third contradiction for us. All right, so the zeitgeist being one, the other being a communication strategy. And I think that the communication strategy might be reflective of, I have a sense that because we are in the second generation of the professional organizing class, as we would call it, post the civil rights generation, right? Where their jobs is that they organize. That one managerial classes historically can never have been trusted. So that's just our class is a suspicious class anyway, right? All us, we are managers in the managerial class. And the global South teaches us that typically we go get fancy degrees, we come back, we do the bidding of the former colonial power. That's our function, right, in history. And so I wonder, I feel like a lot of folks who are in leadership around the country in these movements, sometimes I wonder if they love Black people. Right now, I'm not talking about are Black people a part of a oppressed political class? Are they subject to the mass incarceration? Or at the brunt of the yes, at the brunt of the climate change? All of the things that we can say that's wrong with the world, we can point to Black people represent the worst of those social indicators, right? So, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about I feel like with this particular managerial class, there's a distance from the people in a sense like, do you know what a candy lady is?
Where you get your frozens at?
Right. Yeah, you know what I'm saying, right? Like, you know how to play double dutch? Do you know how to play slide? Right? These kind of cultural markers that say you from us. You know what I mean? And you know the rules. Right? Because part of in organizing Black people is you got to know the rules. Just like you do with any people. Right? You know you ain't gonna invite them Orthodox Jews over your house and try to give them no pork, right? You know the rules, right? So the same thing with Black people, you know the rules, right? You know where where deference is due. You know how to navigate the cultural framework. So one thing is that I used to say when I was doing in the height of the that time between 2014 and 2016, the country on fire. At the height of it, I talked to some of those I go to a town and I said, baby, can you tell me who the dean of the black preachers is? And they said, Bishop so-and-so got the biggest church and he held a problem at it. I said, I didn't what I asked you. I asked you, there's somebody in town who's in proximity to the civil rights movement, right? Who probably marched with King. Church may not be big, but he know where all the bodies buried. And if he make a call, everybody got to show up. Right? There's one of them in every town with any significant amount of black people, right? But in their mind, it was the big church. But like, you see what I'm saying? And so what I'm saying is that, like, I wonder, my fear a lot of times is I'm just wondering if this generation only love black people like them. I'm not sure if they love niggas, right? And Jim Lawson wanted niggas to get free. Right? We may disagree with it, but he's like, y'all got to get this goddamn segregation off you. I'm gonna show you how, right? Because he loved black people, right? That you see what I'm saying? Like we can disagree with his politics, right? Like with Farrakhan, we can disagree with his politics, but we believe he loves black people.
Yeah, I think that's right. I don't think there's any question about that. And I think, I think, you brought up Gramsci, so he's heavy in my brain now, Bishop. First thing I'm hearing is like to tell the truth is revolutionary. So I'm gonna tell some truths, and y'all will have to forgive me on the front end, and just trust that there'll be a point. Also that, like, I'm a pessimist because of intelligence, but an optimist because of will. I think that's what time it is on the clock of the world, at very least on the clock of the United States. And lastly, that, like, the challenge of modernity is to live without illusions and without becoming disillusioned. And I think that's actually the crisis of a generation, is that these young people aren't stupid, right? One, they're not monolithic. Two, they're not stupid, right? They're growing up at a time where, as Mervyn Mercado often said, they're being shown that Black people know how to fight for the dead better than they know how to keep folks alive. Right? In all the ways, whether that's like defunding police or, stopping gun violence or whatever, right? Stopping domestic violence, stopping intimate partner violence, stopping homophobic and transphobic violence, stopping the oppression of disabled Black people, whatever, right? Not hating poor Black people, right? Not being scared of formerly incarcerated and currently incarcerated Black people, et cetera, et cetera. But also, like, the multiple intersecting and converging and expanding crises that they're getting stuck holding, right? Whether that's police violence or intercommunity violence or the climate crisis that's man-made or any number of attack on reproductive justice, right? Like all these things, they're like, well, if y'all are so smart, you didn't fix it, right? And our elders are like, you think we don't know that? So I think there's a, and I think there's people who are serving story both in a way that continues to pull this block of Black people who should be loving each other apart from one another, that I think we should be skeptical of. I think we should ask why that narrative is one that's taking shape and becoming contagious across our ecosystem. I think secondly, I think it's easy to point, in hindsight, especially for me, to point fingers at what I think is wrong, though I'm happy to do so. But I think it's more difficult to do what I think our elders have taught us, Sekou. That's like, how can I be self-critical of how we got here? Because it's also, I was around, you know what I mean? And I think that folks have been, to be a good organizer requires like training and execute. You have to do it. Organizing is a doing thing. It's not just a title that you get when you start working for a nonprofit, right? And a lot of people that get the title of organizer are really just project managers, or maybe a program manager. Maybe they're community liaisons, or maybe they're like building relationships between organizations and movement people. That's not the same thing as community organizing. And what that tells me to be self-critical of is that we actually might have done a good job of popularizing the notion of community organizing, so much so that it's now become co-opted and it means everything and nothing at all, right? That's our bad. We should have drawn some lines in the sand around what organizing is and isn't, that we didn't do for all sorts of reasons. And I think you mentioned some of them, Sekou: money, ego, credit, whatever. I also think the reality is that like we had a real challenge with absorption post 2012, right? It's like Trayvon gets murdered, people get in the streets. There's not enough organizations to absorb them, or that are prepared to absorb them. Tamir gets murdered, Sandra Bland gets murdered, Mike Brown gets murdered, right? Like I could go, Freddie Gray, Walter Scott, George Floyd. There's the list is infinite. If a Black person every 28 hours is getting murdered by a police officer, a security guard, or a vigilante, right? And so what did people do? They did what they knew how to do. They did what they saw on television. They saw what they did in the movies that glorify the days of resistance, right? They hit the streets, right? They and then they heard us chanting shit like, who shut shit down? We shut shit down. So that's what they learned how to do. They became excellent at protests, at direct action, at tearing down the things that they disagree with ideologically, while also their ideologies were getting shaped live and in living color just by the presence of showing up and having a lived and embodied experience, either because of their identity or because of their solidarity with folks that were being oppressed. Right? That together, without some political, ideological training home for them, then meant that they joined movements where they did what they had been taught to do in the streets in organizations across the country. They tore shit down because it was not ideologically pure, right? And I think that's something we've got to reckon with if we expect to really be able to build and sustain movements. I think to your point about like loving Black people, I think that there's some real, I think that's a whole thing that'll preach. And, I don't doubt that people, especially in Black movement leadership, love Black people. But I think you're right. It's like, which Black people do they love and have access to and feel accountable to? And not feel accountable to, but like actually accountable to, like whether I want to be accountable or not. The Black people where I'm from will jerk me up if I'm on some dumb stuff, right? Well, it's not about like what I chose. It's about who chose me. Right?
And to be sure, some of that distance has to do with being queer, church abuse, right? So I want to name that some of the materialities.
Some of it is just like folks don't feel comfortable with regular Black people, whether they're queer or not, right? Because there's some class stuff. I think you're right. There's some class stuff there too. So it's like, which Black people do they love? And if they do, are they comfortable following the leadership of the Black people that they say they love? And, do they love Black people the way that Black people are asking to be loved, right? Or are they going into neighborhoods and telling Black people, I love you, and this is how you should be loved because I know better than you what love should look like. And I think those are, and I think that's true whether we're talking about Black movement or anything else. I think a lot of organizers go into communities where they think they're smarter than the regular people that are more directly impacted by the systems of oppression that we're trying to get rid of. And so they go in with solutions that are not community-based and therefore will never work, right?
Yes, I get that.
Yeah, I think that is true. And then I think, Bishop, to your point about like desiring a strategy, a vision, an organized demand to actually win power. I think, a lot of us got that critique, especially post Ferguson, especially post the sustained direct actions, which in and of themselves should have been like, oh my God, y'all did a heroic, unbelievably, thing in the face of complete, inhumanity and treatment that is dehumanizing and taking away your integrity and your dignity by the state. And we answered the question, right? We wrote a policy platform called the Vision for Black Lives that was like 60 plus policy demands that were everything from, non-reformist reform demands that were low-hanging fruit that we thought were totally achievable, all the way to transformative justice demands that we knew might take years and years and centuries of power building to be able to get to, and everything from economic justice demands to demands around reproductive justice, et cetera, et cetera. And so we did that. I would argue hashtag have you read it to comrades who ask questions about the demands. And
Yeah.
when it comes to defund, it's like we said invest, divest first. Right? We said invest in our communities. We said divest from the police state. We said which places in the police state to divest from. We said where to invest in our community infrastructure on the local, state, and federal level. In fact, we wrote a whole bill, an omnibus bill, after George Floyd was murdered called the Breathe Act, which a lot of folks will remember. And Cori Bush currently is got a bill in Congress called the People's Response Act that is a whole plank of our Breathe bill that's just about how the federal government could invest in sustainable, healthy, and equitable communities for Black people, and how that would actually then turn out for everybody. Because when we do something that's good for Black people, everybody in the United States benefits, right?
I have two questions.
Yeah.
I want to start with the more. I've been thinking about as you were talking. I was thinking about this during the Ferguson uprising. I didn't ever explore it, just in terms of as I thought. Not necessarily a thought exercise is a too vain description, but nevertheless, that's what we'll call it. Is Ferguson, right? Just like what that meant, people in the street, is like kind of one eschaton, Bishop, of this ideal of the heavenly is one, and Afro-punk is another eschaton, and I feel like they represent, and I feel like there are very few moments where them overlap. Right, there's some spaces, and I feel like perhaps maybe in BYP, right, there's a few spaces that did overlap. But I was just thinking about those as like kind of cultural sites of resistance, right? Right, because for the most part, they believe the same things, right? The homophobes gonna be the homophobes, and the elite Blacks gonna be the same elite Blacks, right? They gonna do that. But you see what I'm saying? I've been trying to think about is that a way to capture this political moment, though, kind of Ferguson and Afro-punk.
I think that's a really fascinating question. I mean, I think certainly there were like you mentioned some overlaps. I think between BLM, between YP, certainly M for BL2. You might remember, it's kind of ironic thinking about it tonight because with everything that's going on with the genocide in Gaza, it's like M for BL actually had a whole party plan for Afro-punk the weekend that we dropped the Vision for Black Lives, which included in its policy demands a call to the end of the occupation. In fact, we were the first of our generational cohort to say what was happening in Palestine was genocide and apartheid, right? I remember because I landed in New York fresh from my first visit to Palestine. I think my first. And so immediately landed to the Zionist blowback for BL's support of the Palestinian Liberation Movement, particularly PBS. And because we had said that really powerful statement about what was happening in Palestine, Zionists targeted our party, got the host of the location that we were hosting the party in New York to cancel our reservation the day of our party. So I think you're right that there is some relationship there. I think what's interesting to me in a time where I think we have to hold multiple truths is like, the Black community is not monolithic. And I think there are different ideological and class-based spaces and places where resistance is budding and happening. I think certainly those are two benchmarks, I think, for my generation, for sure. But I think that's true for every like Chitlin Circuit Blues Fest that's happening down south, where folks are talking about what revolutionary interventions they're going to have in places that none of the people that watch the show will have ever heard of because it's in rural southern Mississippi and Arkansas and Tennessee and whatever. I think it's true at the Polar Bears swim club in Martha's Vineyard every summer. It's different, but it's certainly Black folks that are thinking about how to be spooks who sat by the door in places that I would never get access to and only know about because of my proximity to them. I think that's true in a bunch of different spaces, but I think Afropunk and Ferguson are two particular benchmarks, I think, for especially for millennial Black people, for certain, no question.
I like what you all are representing and speaking about. We got a few more moments, and I'd like to spend just a little bit of this time that we have remaining focusing in on now, for me, the role of the prophet. We've done a bit of what Gramsci would call, we've added some conjunctural analysis to this space, this moment we're in, this conjuncture we're now facing. It feels very much like we're at a point of an epoch. There's a shift that's happening here, and maybe every generation feels a little epochish, right? But it seems to me you've named, Reverend Sekou, you've named Ferguson and Afropunk as two spaces that are kind of different. Then maybe we could talk about watch stats, and what was happening, at the big concerts that we had, back in the late 60s. I'm remembering, of course, Black Moses coming out, in the chains and doing his thing, at that time. But also I'm remembering Rance Allen, a young Rance Allen, Bishop Rance Allen, who was singing his R&B funk, and was tearing it up at that same time, while that being a response in Watts to what was happening in New York, right? Culturally, there was this kind of cultural moment. And so for me, what's then the role of those of us who are, who I would name are we were talking about it just a little bit earlier. We're the wisdom, hopefully. We certainly are the older ones now. And what is our role in this prophetic, what should we be doing now? We're the prophets. And clearly for me, one place I want to lean in on, and I've been doing this as much as I can. I think the Repo Justice framework offers some of that leaning in for me. One, the human right to maintain bodily autonomy. All right, we get to say on it because this is what I get to say who and what and how I want to be in the world, but I also get to say what I want and what I don't want. I get to in the RJ frame, it's children, the right to have children or the right not to have children, right? But then the fourth one, the fourth frame, is that, listen, I have the right to say I want to live and thrive in safe and sustainable communities. All right. So for me, my role is to say, okay, we have something here to work from, and let's run these scenarios through that, and then what are the ways in which we can build power toward our liberation? Let's talk. So for me, that the role of the prophet is the kind of building to the community. I don't know who the we is. That's another whole question. Who do we talking about? You got to be more specific than that. But I am thinking that there are what you all name. We can walk and talk and chew gum all at the same time. We can do that. We can do a couple of things. We can disagree about some particulars while also holding the line that there are some things that ought to be. Some things are right, some things are wrong. That's for me the moral question. It just is. So could we spend just a little bit of time on what is the role that we now play in this conjuncture? Maybe it's an epoch, but in this conjunctural moment, what should be our role?
I think I've written this before, that the task of the artist in a time of monsters is to remind us that monsters are not new and they will not have the last word. Right? I think we just have to just like keep saying that, like they ain't new and they not gonna have the last word. Right. So I think that's one of our like modes of being. Secondly, I actually taught Gramsci this semester. I taught his intelligence and education and that reader with the foreword by the great Eric Hobsbawm. And then so I've been thinking a lot about organic intellectuals and me in my own location, thinking about understanding pastors as organic intellectuals who are committed to being alongside social movements, right? And creating space and gathering resources to play a role in a social movement, not necessarily be it, but to be a role. We're gonna hold this lane down, right? So I think that's that's the other thing, and the other piece is that I've been trying to Ashley won't tussle with me.
You better give me something worth fighting over. I'm ready.
I wish what I would have wished, what I would have liked to see happen. If the greatest intellectual of the 20th century, late 20th century, would have stayed with the Green Party. Hear me out. Stay with the Green Party. Probably one of the only forces in the U.S. could have unified large back swaths of the left. We could have seized power in a Green Party. Could have seized power in the Green Party, and actually authentically had a Black-led, multiracial, progressive, and at times electoral arm of a social movement. It was my plan. And stay out the swing states. Let them have them. Right? But we build it out, we raise the money, and we use it to establish organizing like forms of, various forms of like, when you think about the committees for the defense of the revolution, different contexts, but you understand what I'm talking about.
Yes.
Like we use those bases and we build those out everywhere they go. And we can do it for little or nothing because ain't a Black preacher in the South that I can't call.
Yep.
And so you want to come stand in a pulpit and do your voter registration outside the door. It can be real low budget, right? And have a different communication strategy. That's another question. I think meaning that would have been my choice. And a candidate, a Black woman from the South, VP, would have been my choice. Express so. That I wonder if that's a play that we build toward for 28. We can find. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, now you're definitely digging for a fight, and I'm ready for this one. I'm gonna respond to him real quick, Bishop, and then I'm gonna answer your question. I think what could have happened with the Green Party is all sorts of stories of apple pie, rainbows, and butterflies. What happened was
with unicorns on that too. Unicorns in there.
Unicorns, pots of gold at the end of the rainbow, all of it. But if the Green Party wasn't going to reckon about race and gender, then they were never going to become a party that could be like in right relationship with social movements, period. And that's what happened. And could it have been any number of things? Yes, certainly. In the same way that the Democratic Party could become anything. Right? Now, what I would say, though, towards right now, tomorrow, today, yesterday, and towards the future, is I think we've seen now that there is something that is becoming a more viable third-party option. It's called the Working Families Party. It's led by a Black man that was one of the co-founders of the Working Families Party, a Black man who was sleeping on people's couches and showing up in the streets in Ferguson, a Black man that has done electoral work from a Black organizing perspective. He's a HU grad. Right? Like, dude is down for our people. It's got people like Jennifer Knox and Nalini Stamp and others. They've sent a socialist from Texas to Congress.
Can they run a national project? Can they run a national?
They are and will, yes.
You think they'll run a national candidate?
Absolutely.
Now, I had no idea.
Absolutely.
That's a
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think WFP is the only viable political party that is actually right now showing up and showing out, building an alternative to the Democratic Party while also challenging the corporate Democrats inside their own party apparatus. Right. So, and is doing it in relationship with social movements, right? Like there are organizations who are represented on their national committee, right? Their governing body.
No, you don't have to sell me. I just didn't know it was happening.
Oh yeah, man. Like if Jamal Bowman and Cori Bush and Summer Lee get reelected, it will be in no small part due to the incredible base building of local organizations and the power of the national flank from the Working Families Party. I believe that deeply.
And I would co-sign on that because as quiet as it's kept here in Connecticut, in Hartford, our of course we're a one-party town. Yeah. But the minority party is the Working Families Party.
Totally. They've got ballot recognition in so many places. I think, and I think to your point, Sekou, they're the ones that are doing what the Green Party should have done.
Okay.
I don't disagree with the what.
Yeah. But I want to caution though. I want to caution just for a moment, and it's my show. I want to caution that if we are only doing work at the political level, aren't we making the same mistake that our elders did before? That we put so much effort and so much energy in electoral politics that we left off culture stuff. We left off the base building in some other spaces where we have suffered from that, and so I'm
totally. I think that's the lesson of the 21st century. Like, I think there are multiple lessons that 21st century activists are holding, right? There's definitely stuff around gender. There's definitely stuff around sexuality. There's the complicated duality of this self-care versus communal care stuff. But we're trying to figure out how to do this revolutionary work without killing people, because martyrdom is not sexy and actually doesn't help us win, right? Like that we have to be strategic about those things. And I think certainly that not even just elections, but that no one tactic can get us to liberation. We actually have to be building multi-sectorally, right? We got to get rid of some of that 20th century sectarianism in this conjunctural analysis. We have to be intentional about building multi-sector, multi-tactical strategies. And frankly, that they've got to be ecosystem wide. The days or even we could have individual organizations with individual strategies and individual tactical plans and somehow, fit all the puzzle pieces together towards power isn't working. So totally agree with you about that, Bishop. And then I want to answer your question about what is the role of the prophet, because I'm just a basic Baptist. I don't know everything. I'm probably, the most well-known union dropout that I know of my generational cohort. But what I do know is what I've heard about what prophets are supposed to do. I've heard that they're supposed to teach. I've heard that they're supposed to interpret and make meaning of what God has told them is happening in the moment and should be happening to build a future where they're successful and thriving. I've heard that prophets are supposed to call people toward repentance, right? And I think the U.S. has a lot to be repentant for, right? I think that prophets are supposed to reveal revelations and give directions for the benefit of the people, right? That they're supposed to be foretelling, right? We've got Project 2025 breathing down our neck. The rights prophets are doing the damn thing. What is our version of that foretelling of what the world could be if we weren't just rooted in fear and harm, right? They're supposed to be servants. They're supposed to be encouraging faithfulness. If we just had a handful of prophets, whether they were ordained clergy or not, frankly, that we're doing all of those things with a base, right? In the same way that we expect organizers to be accountable to a base, so should our prophets, right? And if they were doing all of those things toward our ideological belief and our recognition that, like, in this conjuncture, we've got to build power to govern ourselves. That's the only thing. That's it, right? That what the right has done well is recognize that there is an objective united front that is proto-fascist, is down for authoritarianism, is white Christian nationalist, and does not give any cares about the wellness of our people. And they've decided that they're gonna rule that united front. We've got a pro-democracy united front that's everybody from log cabin Republicans to black bloc anarchists, and we are not leading that united front. But we could if we decided that we were going to be the ones with a strategy to meet this conjuncture, that decided that we were going to make meaning of the moment for our folks. And, you know, I am grateful for folks like the two of you who are, you know, filling in the leadership vacuum that we created around who is making meaning of the moment for our people. I think that's what I would desire from prophets, the role of prophets in this moment.
Thank you. I am, it's on me heavy. I'm saying that with like the old people who trained me and raised me up. It's on me heavy to say, hold on a minute. Yeah, I know we got an election. There's always an election. So I'm not missing that. And yet we've got to start to look at not just this next election. It's the greatest election of our time. They say that about every one, right?
This one is pretty bad.
Now this one,
the last one was pretty bad too, but this one is pretty bad. Ain't nobody arguing that though.
Ain't nobody mad with you when you say this one is bad. And we survived the last one because y'all would have never thought I would have said in 2016 that other one. Anyway, I'm not trying to make this partisan in that kind of way, and yet. I love what you said, Sekou. That ain't the last word. That's not the last word. All right. And for me, there's some hope in that. And I pulled heavy to try to find the hope in some hopeless times. All right. The folk I represent in the community I represent, Hartford 160, 70 years ago was the jewel city of the Industrial Revolution. Wasn't no poor people that lived in this city. Today, we one of the poorest cities in the nation. Yeah. Right? In a state that's one of the richest states in the country. And it's a small state, but there's a whole lot of money and a whole lot of wealth that roll up into here, and a whole lot of way in which we are totally locked out. And so I'm asking the question of my family. Family, what do we need to be doing? How do we need to be angling? What are the strategies? There's big strategies and there's medium-sized strategies, and then there's low-hanging fruit. Seeing to me, low-hanging fruit is some of what you all been talking about. If we would just turn to our neighbor and say, neighbor, answer, dot. There's a way in which, the power of the pulpit, for some of us, and I would say, Ashley, you carry your own pulpit. There's a way in which the work that you do has been seminal out there in the trenches where don't nobody go but a couple of people. It's only a couple of people know where them places are that you go. So it is in those moments where we illumine, that there's something greater and bigger. The best thing that blessed my life, one of the best things that blessed my life was leaving the United States at 18, 19 years old and going across the water. Because all of a sudden, I wasn't that little boy that was raised in Kinloch or north side of St. Louis, right? All of a sudden, within an instant, 4 hours, 5 hours, 6 hours, 8 hour flight, I ended up becoming a global citizen. And what that did to my mindset that allowed me to come back into a space and do the work to become the preacher, the prophet that I feel like I might be in some ways. And yet the work ain't done. I turn around and boo-boo's still out there. So I appreciate very much the sincerity and the seriousness of the call, if you will. Now that Sekou, you and I have been on this road, this journey a while. Sister Ashley, you've been right there with us in your spaces and places. And yes, we are in this conjunctural moment. And we need all of our minds, our best selves in these moments to presente, all right, and get this work did. All right. And it can't just be it can't be just a one pony show. We got to talk electoral politics. Yeah. We got to also talk about cultural politics and not just politics. We got to talk about this culture. We got to stop calling things what they not. And then start calling some things that be not as though they were and are. So I mean, that's the role we got to do. We got to come on, baby girl and baby boy. You come up from that. You better than that. You not just see R.G. Lord, Prophet R.G. Lord. I'm getting ready to go down that road. She said, "Listen, I don't live a one issue life. So why I got to be a one issue person? I live multiple lives, multiple issues in my life. And so I got to represent in all those spaces and places. It is our task, ultimately, for me, to dig into this moment, to understand what it is that we've been called to do. That's why I love the call of Samson. I'm sorry, of Samuel. Samuel, he didn't know the voice. He had to go in there to Eli. Eli told him, next time you hear that voice, he ran in there twice, waking that man up. You know, the churn will wake you up in the middle of the night, calling you. Sekou, down there in Ferguson. Lord, they out there, you know, they young, strong, they out there all night long. As soon as they start saying that both me and you, our head went to dropping. Lord, here we go.
We've been out here all night.
Bishop, he definitely complained about that chant to younger people. It definitely did happen.
Listen, it's already 11 o'clock. I'm a couple hours past the, you know. Woo! But I know if I'm not out here, you know, the libel, it go real crazy. You know, it's possible, right? So that's the commitment we make. It's what you named. It's how do you love and how do you show that love for your people, for our people? And there are ways in which that gets actualized. And I say that folk know who love them and who don't.
Yeah, they do.
Yeah.
They know. And I think this goes to your point about like, it's got to be more than electoral, right? It's like the difference, you know, and again, a lot of lessons from 2020. No question that the only reason that Donald Trump isn't already serving a second term is because Black people showed up and made it impossible for him to, right? Like Black vote turned out across the US, shout out to Georgia, who made the difference, right? Black Southerners and Black folks that were beneficiaries of the Great Migration showed up and showed out. And Joe Biden got lucky because he was the only candidate that we could vote for in that particular scenario, right? I think this goes back to what Sekou said about the shoulda, coulda, wouldas, is like, if we had consolidated behind Bernie, who was not my candidate, or Elizabeth Warren, who was my candidate, which sounds crazy coming out of my mouth because I'm a leftist, but time, place, and conditions, you know, she was the one that actually would talk about race. If we had not been split in that way, Joe Biden probably wouldn't have had a chance. But because we were, Joe Biden becomes the 46th president of the United States, right? And in that time, you know, we're hitting doors. Black folks are like, we don't fuck with Joe Biden. Like, that's the dude that wrote the crime bill. Like, half us have been locked up over some stuff that Joe Biden supported. And we were like, yeah, man, we know. But he's running against a fascist, man. Like, you know, we got to do what we got to do to stop this authoritarian fascist movement from successfully taking over the federal government, right? The executive branch, one of the most powerful positions in the whole wide world. Like, we got to do something about it. And maybe we'll have enough power to hold Biden accountable to some of our demands, right? That was the promise. Biden gets elected and he's done the bare freaking minimum, right? I'm not trying to say he's been a savior of our people. He's not been, though he has probably been the most pro-queer president in the history of the United States. That's not untrue, right? His administration has done a lot to fight for protections of LGBTQ plus people. But that doesn't mean the material conditions have shifted immediately, right? Yes, he got the infrastructure bill passed. That's going to be incredible economic gains for Black people. No question. But we need 4 more years to fill that, right? We haven't felt anything immediately from Joe Biden since like the STEMI checks. And people don't even remember that was him. Right? So the stuff he's doing around immigration, right? Y'all got to remember, a lot of them Black people at the border are not brown Mexicans. They are Black Haitians. They are Black folks from Sudan and Congo and Nigeria and other places that are coming to the United States, not because they want to be Americans, but because they have no choice, because sometimes we've been intervening in their countries in ways that force them to have to migrate. Right? So again, I'm not saying Joe Biden is like my guy. I hate him. No one hates him more than me. The thing that we have to do more of in 2024 than we did in 2020, which I think gets to your point about why it's got to be more than just elections, Bishop, is we actually have to have the power, the sustainability, and the momentum to actually fight for the demands that we want of the state while also not being in a codependent relationship with the Democratic Party. Right? There's some things that we need to autonomously do for our own communities. That's keeping each other safe. We've got to answer the abolitionist call, right? It's like abolition is great. I'm an abolitionist, but when I go home and I talk to the people in the hood about whether or not they want a police precinct in their community, they're like, hell yeah, we want a police precinct in the hood. Are you kidding me? These boys stealing our Social Security checks every first of the month, like put the cops right beside me, bro. When I'm like, but grandma, like, ain't it annoying when they be flashing their lights in your apartment at 3:00 in the morning? She like, yeah, it's messed up. And I'm like, ain't it messed up when they killed Javario Eagle? She was like, yeah, bet you right. They don't really do nothing for us. I'm like, yeah, like they don't stop your Social Security check from getting stolen. They just respond to it. She was like, oh yeah, that's right. And when we get to the logical conclusion, she's like, why are we wasting money on things that don't work from the state? When if we invested them in community solutions, we actually could be good. So I think we have to be really, really clear about what we have the power to control. I also think we have to be real that just to not participate in the elections are not inconsequential. So all of us have to get in where we fit in relationship to where are we best placed to build more self-determined power of Black people. For some of us, that'll be the governance of our churches, right? It means something to go to Gina Stewart's church these days because Gina Stewart drew a line in the sand about what is and is not acceptable under the guise of our spiritual purity. Right? Patriarchy is not acceptable under the shroud of spiritual purity. It's not. Homophobia and transphobia and classism, those things are not acceptable under the guise of spiritual purity anymore. We've called it. It's been claimed. And she ain't even the first or the last one to do it, right? There's some stuff that we have to struggle with in our own governance bodies, but I think in relationship to the state, the difference between 2020 and 2024 is that it won't be enough, Bishop, to say this is the most important election of our lives. We'll have to say that because that is true, but the finishing of the sentence is that we also actually have to have the power to be a self-determining body that forces the hand of Joe Biden if he gets reelected. I think what that then requires is for us to get really sharp about what our demands are. And frankly, what we have traditionally done is give him a list of 20 billion things that we expect of him, knowing damn well we don't have the power to hold him accountable for any of it. But right now, what our communities are saying they want is they want reproductive justice. They're saying they want an arms embargo with Israel, and they want the end of climate disasters. They want something on climate change. And I think we have to go really hard in the paint for those three things with the Biden administration. I think if we do that, we can win. We got to focus.
We do. We are way past time. And I appreciate very much your time. I know Reverend Sekou, they jamming you up on the phone. They where you at and how long you gonna be. I know it.
Yeah. I'm supposed to cook dinner tonight.
See, that's what I'm talking about. That's what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about right there.
Reverend D, it was not my fault.
Listen, wasn't mine either. And you tell Doc I said, praise the Lord. Praise the Lord.
It's like I see you on that podcast. What time did I?
Listen. I appreciate both of you so very much. This won't be the last time we have some conversation. Ashley, holler at me. Hold on, because we get them digits, and then we can talk some more about how we can keep these conversations going. It is vital that we engage in the ways that we've just done. That we cross these divides, that we name some of these things, and that there's some theory behind it. This is just not hocus pocus. We just making stuff up. We actually there's some change theory that's in operation here. There is some prophetic, in the midst of this, and I believe the Spirit is moving. Now I'm gonna turn to the sanctified preacher that I really am, and the Holy Ghost is churning in us because there's a restlessness afoot. And some of the complaint, some of the charge is out of that restlessness, that there is something we got to do, and it just can't be, that slow Joe moves slow Joe. right? It can't just be that I am totally with you that we've got to have the political strength and muscle to say, okay, you made these said promises, and we coming to task on some of this right here, because you better be believing that the other side, like they played it out, they was right there with their tip cup. Okay, you said you was gonna do, and to some degree he delivered. We got the Supreme Court we got right now because he delivered it. Anyway, I'm gonna get off of that. Thank you, and I appreciate you both very much, folks. This is where we're going. We're curating some conversations about the role of the prophet. Again, thank you, Sister Ashley. Thank you, bro Sekou, for being willing to be with us. We'll see y'all same bat channel, same bat time. We're gonna have more conversations. Follow us, click like, all the stuff y'all know y'all supposed to do to help us so we can get these analytics right. And I appreciate you all. Blessings to you. God bless. Peace out.